This is Lily May. She was a blues singer also known as Ma Rainey II, and I'm just going to tell you a little story about her. You see, one evening following the show, Lily May was approached by a young woman in a tattered, dirty dress with a busted lip. And Lily May asked her, "What can I do for you?" And she could tell that the lady had been crying because of the makeup streaming down her face. And the shy young woman just mumbled through a handkerchief that her boyfriend had been beating her and had now taken to stealing her money for whiskey. So, of course, Lily Mae was like, "We can't have that. Come to my dressing room. And I promise you, we're going to fix him and put a root on him so bad that not only will he leave town, but he's not going to hurt anybody else." And left the girl telling her that she should bring with her the next time she comes a sock from the young man, and she was going to fix everything. So the girl ran off into the night, joyful. It's like, "Thank you, Lily Mae. Thank you. I'll be back." 2 nights later, the girl came back, and Lily Mae could see from the stage this familiar face, and the girl started waving this sock. Lily Mae once again led her back to her dressing room. And there she poured "Do As I Say" oil on the sock and gave the girl and wrote the man's name on it and gave the girl the instructions that she was to take it to a creek. And from there, as it floated away, so too with the man, and she would never have to worry about him again. The next week, a similar looking woman came into the club, and she was the young woman's sister. And you see, her sister had nearly drowned herself while trying to do as Lily Mae said. And she didn't believe in any of this hoodoo mumbo jumbo and wanted Lily Mae to stop all this nonsense. Lily Mae, of course, as you can see, was probably not a woman to be trifled with, didn't like to be threatened, but also thought that perhaps beating up your client's sister was not the best bet for business. So she just sent her off in a huff with words that a Christian woman should not say. And that was the end of that chapter. Until about 3 weeks later, when a waitress from a fellow Beale Street juke joint came in, and she was like, "Ma Rainey, they told me that you got power. They said that you put a root on this man that was beating this girl, and he left town the very next day. So I need your help." So I tell you this story because if you go down to Memphis, Tennessee, and to any one of the curios shops on Beale Street, they will tell you that yes, there really was a Lily Mae who had power to put on roots on people and to drive trifling men out of town. But the unfortunate thing is that we don't often see these stories in music or television or even in the films that we see. I'm a little switched up. So, what I'm going to do today, we're going to discover today the persona of the Conjure Woman, who is often described as having two heads or examining two worlds. On the one hand, she brings the supernatural to the ordinary by acting as a guide to the spirit world, but also lives in the flesh by embracing the body through dance or sex. She lives as part of the community, but often can be away from the community because she is touched by the other world, whether by choice or by being just disowned by her community, which has often led to a degree of independence and freedom. But before all of that, I just want to announce I am Tyra, mistress of the Imaginarium, and I like to do YouTube videos about horror, fantasy, and all that jazz. So as you come with me, just throw a little salt over your shoulder, keep your mojo bag close, and we'll just crack in. So stories of magical women have been known, also known as conjure tales, have trickled down into the lyrics of the Delta blues. Now, the blues has often acted as a form of oral history, and it's here where you'll find the clearest description of conjure materials like John the Conqueror root and mojo bags. And in turn, the same life struggles that could be healed through roots and spirit intervention could also inspire the tunes of blues musicians. Okay. Conjure is usually associated with men when it comes to the blues, especially with motifs of freedom and sexual prowess. With the most famous conjure story being that of Robert Johnson and his deal with the devil at the crossroads in order to gain musical talent and fame. And here's an artistic rendition of him. But it was blues women like Lily May and the pictured here legendary Coco Taylor, who not only practiced hoodoo, but also took on the persona of the Conjure Woman while on stage. Which makes sense because both conjurers and blues women occupied similar complex social status within the Black community. These women were considered very immoral and dangerous because of their excesses and celebration of bodily pleasure. And their reveling and bragging about their prowess with their many lovers, soon some of whom were even women. Other themes included advice to women, drinking, partying, heartache, jail and serving time, and even vengeance. All these things could also be remedied with conjure through performing a spell, a trick, or a mojo bag. The Conjure Woman was a 1926 silent film by Black film pioneer Oscar Micheaux and was based on a short story collection of the same name. Now, unfortunately, the film has been lost to history, but it tells of Peggy, who was known as a renowned conjure woman in her own community. And Peggy was also known in the story as for having uncanny abilities and could fly by the air at night. Voodoo would continue to be featured in horror movies of old Hollywood. However, the practice was nearly always featured as something innately evil, with Black characters never taking center stage and being pushed to the margins as either servants or tribespeople. That is until the 70s and the introduction of Blaxploitation horror. One of my favorite movies of this era is Blacula Scream, which is the sequel to the 1972 movie Blacula. Now, in the film, after a dying voodoo queen named Mama Loa chooses as her successor her adopted daughter Lisa, played by Pam Grier, who you can see right here, her son Willis, who feels he is the true heir, decides to raise Blacula from the dead because he was defeated in the aforementioned movie in order to get revenge. And of course, this basically goes as well as you think it does, because the first thing Blacula does when he's raised is makes Willis a vampire so that he can be his minion. And then after hearing about Lisa and what she could do, goes to find her so that she can then take the vampiric curse off of him. But Lisa is also one of my favorite horror movie heroines. I love how director Bob Killian goes out of his way to depict Lisa as elegant, regal, intelligent, and thoroughly middle class. She even meets Blacula at a cocktail party given by African studies professor who's there to showcase jewelry. And she's surrounded by friends who are also middle class and have professional jobs. These are people who are not just Black and proud, but they're thriving in their environment. Lisa is also patterned very much in the vein of Mina Harker from Dracula and nearly hits every single beat of that story. She is soft-hearted and caring for her friends and others, but is also very unsure of herself due to her status as an orphan, even though she was chosen by her coven members to be their leader. And so Lisa's journey is that of learning to embrace her role as voodoo queen and therefore embrace her own personal power. The film also takes place in the world of voodoo, in which different points of view are presented and thought out. For Blacula and the members of the coven, voodoo is seen as this healing force for good. For Willis, Mama Loa's son, it is seen only as a route to power. And for Lisa's boyfriend and his cop friends, voodoo is just some superstitious cult. As a rising queen, Lisa simultaneously represents Blacula's biggest help, and biggest threat. He needs her to end his vampiric curse, but at the same time, this is a power that can absolutely destroy him. And so in the climactic battle, Lisa who's been forced by Blacula back to his lair in order to perform this ritual that will free him. Meanwhile, her boyfriend, Justin, has rounded up the cavalry to save the day. And it's this dual action that makes it great in this scene. Unfortunately, I can't show it to you today, but if you ever get to check it out, you'll see that on the one side, you have a ritual being performed by Lisa. And you have all the accoutrement of voodoo there. You have dolls and candles and chanting. And there's even the hinted buildup of African drums. But on the other hand, you're put in the same shoes as Lisa and Blacula. With the mixture of, as the slow pace ramps up, you have a mixture of Dutch angles and extreme close-ups. And so then it leads to quick editing cuts and it lends to a sense of tension and urgency. You could almost feel that Justin is about to burst his way in as things come about. And eventually he does. And when the ritual is interrupted by Lisa's boyfriend, he's attacked by angry Blacula. And so Lisa, having to see the person that she loves most attacked, now takes her final step towards power by protecting her boyfriend and destroying Blacula herself. Even though horror was big business in the 80s, when it comes to how voodoo was depicted, there seems to be a reversion of sorts. Voodoo once again falls under the umbrella of dark magic only, and it's a move that can be seen in Angel Heart's Epiphany Proudfoot, as seen here played by Lisa Bonet. Now, set in the 1950s, it is a classic Devil at the Crossroads story with a noir twist. In this world, though, voodoo is dark, dangerous, and is closely aligned with the devil. Epiphany herself is mainly used in service of the plot, in spite of her being a voodoo priestess herself. Her story just is there to lend to the gut punch that is the protagonist's final fate, living up to her name Epiphany, which also means revelation or a lighting up of an idea. A film that gives a little more nuance to this story, to the world of voodoo of this era for me, is The Serpent and the Rainbow. Set in a time during political unrest, Dennis Allen, played by Bill Pullman, as seen here, has traveled to Haiti in order to investigate the story of a man who was allegedly turned into a zombie. Now, even though the film focuses on Bill Pullman's character, as seen right here, he is assisted by Marielle Deschamps, who is a medical doctor in her own right, and it's pictured right here as well. Though it's not made completely clear in the film, it's implied that Marielle wants to stop the fear being spread by the secret police and their use of zombification to intimidate those that would oppose them. Voodoo is deeply entrenched in Haiti's culture and religion, not only in the film, but as in real life. A zombie is to them, a zombie is equivalent to eternal suffering and pain as a spiritual slave. And to Marielle, by revealing the formula just to be a matter of science rather than spirit, she hopes to free her people from the emotional slavery that they're now stuck in. Marielle is also a devotee of Azila Frida, the Haitian voodoo manifestation of the goddess of love, beauty, and femininity. Her interaction with Dennis is very much like that of Beatrice from Dante's Divine Comedy, who also represents religious knowledge, passion, and grace. And so it's these two selves that are connected in which Marielle embodies. She, on the one hand, when she starts to become Dennis's lover, and then guides him on the quest to finding the formula for zombification. So you have this dual personality within Marielle in which she is lover and guide, and then is the very key to leading the way to the priest responsible for all the horror that's occurring, but is awkwardly sidelined because 80s, just so that Dennis can become the hero. The 90s brought about a revival of independent filmmaking, paving the way for new Black female creators to tell nuanced stories that centered around Black characters and placed them now back center stage, creating them with a range of depth. But the new 90s would also bring, mid 90s would also bring around the trend of Southern Gothic movies with stories taking place in the American South rooted in folklore, suspense, and the supernatural, starting with Daughters of the Dust, and then my personal favorite again, Eve's Bayou. Eve's Bayou is told from the perspective of the young protagonist, played by Journey Smollett. It centers on a seemingly perfect middle class family during the 1950s who are also Creole, and takes place during the summer in which Eve comes into her own psychic gifts as well as her own maturity as a woman, opening her eyes to the world and losing the rose colored glasses that we often see the world as children with. When we're young, we always think that the sky is blue and that our parents are perfect, loving, and happy. But as the sweltering summer draws on, her gift literally grants Eve the new eyes in which to see all the complexities, faults, and insecurities, and even the humanity of all the adults around her. This is the first step as Eve steps into womanhood, to seeing the world through not only the eyes of an adult, but also the woman who would always see too much. Numerous contemporary examples like True Blood and American Horror Stories Govern have to varying degrees used voodoo and conjure to explore heritage, female empowerment, and dissect harmful stereotypes altogether. But it's in Beyonce's visual albums, Lemonade and Black is King, that we gain a different perspective. Beyonce used folklore along with various traditions of the Gullah and Creole peoples to explore the emotional journeys of grief, reconciliation, and Black identity through music, lyrics, visuals, and poetry. And it's her embodiment of Oshun of the Yoruba goddesses Oshun in Lemonade and Imanya in Black is King. They can also be read as Beyonce's own story from one of generational curse breaking and inner healing to be able to guide others on that journey. But for me, the character whose journey reflects the most of the Conjure Woman arguably could be Bilquis of American Gods. Now, when we first meet Bilquis, we see her devouring a man through sex, during sex, through her vagina, in one very unforgettable sex scene, and is also known as a demon. But as we learn her story, we learn that not only was she worshipped as a queen, who had the ability to embody ecstasy and sensuality, but was a primordial goddess whose true power derived from the waters of creation. She had only forgotten herself and needed to be reminded of it. We should all want to be conjure women. Much like the various characters we've explored this afternoon, she has evolved from communal healer to being demonized, overlooked, or forgotten, to now being a path working for modern Black women to transform through healing and embodying their own sexuality. A conjure woman is a woman of power that commands respect, and as artists are able to create human portraits of Black femininity and culture through the lens of this archetype, their ability to do so in a mainstream way not only allows for Hollywood, albeit slowly, to embrace more of a representative portrayal, but also allows audiences from around the globe to bask in their glory. And so, thank you for listening. I'm Tyra, Mistress of the Imaginarium, and it has been my pleasure to speak to y'all today. You can also find me on the web on my website on Protector Imaginarium. You can find me on Instagram under Mistress of the Imaginarium and also on YouTube under Mistress of the Imaginarium. And thank you so much for listening.
As far as in my analyses, there is, because of intersecting identities, Black women issues are the same as Black queer women issues. Like we're all kind of in the same boat as far as that's concerned. And so one of the biggest things to me was in looking at these statistics for violence against transgendered women. And so I think that I tend to think of the idea of inclusivity, meaning that we have to include the intersecting identities too.
Yeah, in doing my research, because I have such a specific interest in the 1970s, I think homosexuality and queerness is something that is like always present, kind of hidden in a lot of these films. But unfortunately, it's generally treated as a threat, especially if you're dealing with, the 70s and this era where there's such a focus on preserving the Black family, on preserving Black masculinity. And there's just a real fear of it. And it tends to be treated as such a dire threat to preserving Black dignity. But I think there are some really interesting examples. One of my favorite early examples of Black queer filmmaking is Mark of Lilith, 1981. It was previously only available on VHS. The British Film Institute just released it on DVD, I believe, earlier this year. So it's this really interesting student film by this Black lesbian filmmaker about this Black human woman who falls in love with this white vampire. And it's just a story of their relationship and the racial tensions and dynamics that emerge because of it, both because the Black woman is a human and also because of the class and racial differences. So if you're looking for something that's like early, like Black queer horror, I would definitely recommend seeking it out. It's really interesting.
Images that you watched in telling these narratives, exploring film history. I was wondering if there are any other figures that you discovered along the way that maybe didn't make it into the presentation, but were reported through the process.
Oh, for sure. Beloved. Like I would just say Beloved, the book and the film. Because my poor husband, like he's always watching me do these things. I'm sitting there with all these slides and I'm going, oh no, I gotta cut some stuff, and so I had to cut Beloved, and oh gosh, this is blasphemy. But this is one of the seminal works. Like I don't know that you can research like Black women in horror without talking about Beloved at all. You kind of have to. It's like it's the Bible, not the a Bible, because it means Coleman's book is like the Bible, right? And so, I mean, I couldn't talk about Sistahs as a monstrous mother here, because it would have just taken up like literal so much time. I mean, in my book proposal, it takes up so much space. But one of the things is the idea of agency and Sethi is, using her agency. Like, she had a choice. The choice was, let your child grow up and be a slave, or kill your child. And she decided to kill her kid. And there's lots of us who kind of go, well, that's no choice. It absolutely was a choice. She exercised the only agency that she had. And so I think that in showing her walk through the guilt in that act, like, she feels that she deserves to be haunted. She feels she doesn't deserve to have a man like Paul D. She feels like she doesn't deserve to have a living daughter. And so she basically, that guilt was the manifestation of that haunting by the character Beloved. And so, I mean, like, and I could talk about Beloved forever. I'm going to shut up now. But yeah, that is like one of the biggest things. And it's really interesting to me, though, that Morrison's work, it wasn't considered horror like for so long. And I'm thinking that that's not because of the horror piece. We totally claimed her from the beginning, right? I think that's more the talk about genre versus literary. But I mean, as far as representation of Black women in horror, there's the mother standpoint. There's also the daughter. Denver was a really big character too. So,
for me, I majorly cut True Blood, and I wanted to go into that particularly because I feel like Lafayette and Tara never really get talked about, and they were part of that as far as like the name of the title. They were the vampire part. And definitely when we talk about both of those characters are queer characters as well as magical characters, and they have a journey. It was very lopsided, but I almost take that with a grain of salt because the characters are. But I would have loved to have talked more about Lafayette as not only coming from a different perspective, because we almost never see male priests like that. He was coming into power, like a lot of power. Like, he was being able to like defeat a Jen, at that level. And then Tara gained power as a vampire. I would have loved to have touched on literature a lot more, because even though I feel in film things are very limited, in literature you have so much and so many different aspects, just because you have so much room to talk about hoodoo and conjure as characters. One of my favorite books that I just finished rereading is called Another Good and Loving Blues, and it takes place in Memphis in the 20s, and it's a love story between a conjurer and a blues man over a decade, of them dealing with each other. And the magic is so integrated into the story, it's almost like real life. There's like all this like fantastic. It's by Arthur Flowers, if anyone ever wants to check it out. Another Good and Loving Blues. There's Mama Day, which is another great book. If you like something like practical magic, you have these two aunts that are set. It's set in Bella Country on it's a made up island. Instead of like St. Helena, it's one of the sea islands on the coast of Georgia. And you have these two aunts that are trying to get their young niece, who they describe as stubborn as a mule the day she came out. They had to like literally pull her out of the womb and trying to hook her up with a boyfriend, because they want her to get married. And them interfering in her love life from far away magically is just one of the greatest things. It's just so there. The culture is there. They're talking about grits and biscuits and making sure this child is set right, and it's just normal.
That sounds delightful.
Literature and True Blood, I would have loved to put that in there.
Two films I cut were Abby, also known as The Black Exorcist, 1974, and Death by Temptation. which are both these really excellent films where the Black woman is this monstrous sex demon figure who is this huge threat to the men in her life who are trying to escape her grasp and subdue her, which is obviously a very like problematic premise, but it's also something that is kind of fun to revel in. These Black women who use their sexuality as a weapon and find freedom through it. So they're both really interesting, excellent movies.
Yes. Yeah, of course. You know, had slides about death by temptation. It's like. I'm really excited about what Nia DaCosta is doing. Watching this newest iteration of Candyman was it really felt to me like a love letter to Black people. There was so much nuance in the experiences that were depicted. There were things that showed that it was really written for the Black gaze, because there were things that they would say and do that they just didn't explain. They didn't have to explain it for a Black audience, right? So I'm really excited that now that now that she's proven herself to mainstream, I'm really hoping that she is able to just kind of get a blank check and to see what she can do.
I'm forgetting her first name, but Professor Dew, I believe, who just came out with the horror anthology, Horror Noir.
Tananarive Dew?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
absolutely.
it's streaming on AMC currently.
Yes.
Incredible anthology. Just absolutely like well researched, well put together. Just incorporates so much elements of Black folklore. There's humor in it. It's amazing. Please go see it.
Yes, it is so wonderful.
I second both of those because the minute I thought of one you said it. Not off the top of my head, but definitely Nia DaCosta, and then that's an excellent documentary. It's just so much fun to sit through it, and you just like sit through it with like a notepad. Anything you didn't
Yes.
watch before, you can now go back and like watch and look.
Mhm. Mhm.
Partly answered it already, but I just want to ask the question again. What in the relation to horror does the mother in what way change your mother with the way you look at horror? Can you tell that, or
Oh.
was there a change?
Oh, for sure. Watching horror as a kid and growing up, like I could read some. I read Carrie when I was like about 7. I shouldn't have read Carrie when I was 7, but I did. It was available, right? There were so many themes and things that I didn't understand. So like being a kid is one thing, or even being a young adult is another thing. So for instance, I read Pet Sematary, and it scared me so badly the first time I read it. I reread it after I had my kid. And then it was a whole different set of horrors. And what I find is that now I didn't actually come into my own as a horror writer until I had already started having children. And that motherhood experience, all the way from pregnancy and the hormones, not knowing what to do with them, the way that your issues with your own parents come to heal. I'm tending towards a lot of things are very different now, because the things that scared me before, they're not scary at all. And now the thing that scares me is, oh my gosh, is the world going to end before my kids grow up? Or we don't have to worry about zombies. We need to worry about this other thing. And so it really does change my whole approach. And I think that that one of the biggest things about that too is that understanding that moms are not always happy or healthy, and are always not able to enjoy that whole experience, with my own health. Right. And so it has totally colored everything. I mean, I think in the best possible way, but yeah, way different.
I'm not a mother, but yeah, I find that in Eve's bio, I was only able to touch on it, but as Eve's eyes start to open with her gift, her life changes and that perspective changes so much, because that whole plot runs on what is happening underneath the surface in that family. What's really going on with the father, what's really going on with the mother, even with her relationship with her aunt, who is just a constant widow. She just keeps losing her husband, and what that means, her relationship to her sister. So as Eve is just being initiated into this adulthood, her eyes go from like, oh, this is this. Why isn't Daddy home? Why isn't this home? Why is Mommy in the kitchen doing blah blah blah? And at first, initially, she doesn't understand it. She asks a question like, show me your hands, Mommy. Why do you keep cutting your fingers in the kitchen? But she doesn't understand. She's getting a symbolic vision of what's happening. So that interplay with what's going on with her actual powers, her gift, what's actually going on in the family, what's actually going on with herself with these new feelings and having to grow up, and what that means for how she looks at the world. That movie hit me differently watching it as a kid. I thought it was really cool to have a kid protagonist. As an adult, I was like, oh, I get what's going on. Doing this research, I was like, how do I explain all of this layer cake of what's going on? So I would say to jump on what you're saying, that my change in perspective has been from as an adult to a kid. That's why I can relate to most.
But there's also the idea that of the mother being kind of the heart of the family, right? Like that whole thing, that's a huge responsibility, man. I mean, and if you're haunted, well, then that automatically means that your whole family's haunted. And I don't, that level of responsibility brings about a certain fear too, though.
But there's also, to jump on what you just said, like cultural fear of, I think as far as what's going to be depicted in horror movies, who's going to have that, ability to be that very first one depicting a bad Black mother, because culturally, if you're a bad mother, your kids, a bad Black mother, you have to prove yourself all the time. Your kids could be taken away from you. Yep. Like, you're looking at your kids. You might literally line your kids up before you leave the house to make sure everything is in the right way. And how you depict it, even disciplining your child outside of the home.
Yes.
And what way are you going to do it?
Yes.
Those are constant thoughts. Yes. So it'll be really intriguing to see like more bad Black moms in horror movies. And if we can do that without like the other side that is policing as far as the culture. You can't show that.
Sure.
You can't show that. They might think we're bad mothers. And it's like, well, not everybody wants to be a mom 24/7. You can't be. It's impossible.
Right.
You're human. We're all human. But there is, culturally, sometimes you can't be human.
Sure.
But that's the horror. Right?
That is the horror. Exactly. Ding, ding, ding.
Okay.
That's a great question.
Yeah. Me and you just talked about
We
that.
were just talking about that.
I feel like we're at a really interesting point in Black horror to be like discussing this, because we're at a point of such great visibility now. Beforehand, in decades past, Black horror really was just for Black people. We didn't have like the big critics looking in. It wasn't a matter of like winning Academy Awards or anything. And now when you make movies about trauma and about like the horrific aspects of the Black experience, there are all these white people who are also watching and who are also consuming. And that's like interesting, uncharted territory. This is like very much a post Get Out moment, so to speak. I don't honestly have all the answers, but I do think that, a core way of navigating that is asking who's in the director's seat, who's producing this, who's writing it, who's in control. And I think that's something we should always be asking when we are consuming media that is Black, like going back to the Blaxploitation question, like it's Black in name, but is it really Black in substance? I think that's something we always have to be asking ourselves.
For me to answer your question, I think, because like I said, we were just talking about it, of like, like what is horrific, and traditionally, what wouldn't, just as Rhonda just said that, Beloved isn't usually listed as a horror book or a horror story. To us, it is. It's that horrific choice, that Sophie's choice of what do you do with your child in this situation. And it was based on a actual true incident that really happened in Illinois. This woman was escaping with her children, and literally she's at the river about to cross, and she gets caught, and they're breaking into the house. And as they're breaking in, she makes this instant decision to kill. She kills 2 of her children. She doesn't kill the third. She has 3 children. And Toni Morrison finds out about this story, and then it's used as that foundation. And that goes along like Black History Month. Usually you're going to have like 12 Years a Slave. We know all these historical things. It's like, oh, for us, that's actual horror movie. That's real life. This is something you're going to have to sit down. When do I watch it? How do I watch it? What am I doing the next day? Who am I interacting with? So I can sit down and really process this. Panther, it's like there. And it's so layered. Just the fact that they were walking in that ballroom scene, and each one of them had the way that they're walking in that formation, and the color of their outfits also resembles the Black flag.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a layered thing. Like someone else is not going to see it, but we see it. And pointing it out to all these different things. Someone's like, you're going overboard. It's too crazy. It's like, no, they deliberately put it there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just going to be this push and pull.
Yeah.
You want the get outs. You want to stay away before we get to Amazon.
Yeah, and I think that I agree with both of you. I just published a blog post with Afro Horror Podcast, and I tell you just exactly how I felt. It's my Black trauma, and I'll write it if I want to. As a horror creator, I already feel like there's all these dictates as to what we can and can't write about, right? Or what you can and can't show, what you can and can't do, and it's not just from outside of the Black community, even inside the Black community. You have some gatekeepers who are like, don't you put that on there. That's a bad character. Don't be airing our dirty laundry, right? In public. But as a creator, I want to write in the genre that I love, which is horror. So I'm going to write about stuff that horrifies me. So the one thing I loved about Antebellum, because I know I was like, oh my gosh, I thought this was great. But because of my own experiences as a woman who has, gotten degrees, a woman who has achieved a certain level of, I guess, success as you define it, I perfectly know what it looks like for someone to want to break you down from that. Yeah. And so to me, that was utterly horrifying that she could have all this success and have made it all this way, and all it takes is for somebody with a penis to just break her down. Right? Like, to me, that is horrific. And that was the horror in it. And so I do think that it's really important, as Adia mentioned, though, it depends on the purpose that it's serving and who has control of the images. So I, as having experienced certain traumas, I feel like I have the right to own those. I can write about surviving rape. I can write about surviving abuse. I can write about racism. But I also would handle the topic as not for shock's sake, because that's not the type of horror I write, right? It is for the purpose of showing this is a situation. It would be important to the plot. It would be important to the character. It wouldn't be just gratuitous trauma just for the sake of it being there. And so I will just ditto. We're in very interesting times.
I think it's like, I feel like it's very easy to tell when a creator is using trauma in a way that feels malicious. Also,
Sure.
like,
Oh, absolutely.
like, not to keep bringing up Get Out, but I'm gonna do it one more time. There's that one scene at the very end where the cop car pulls up, and you, for a split second, think there's a cop that's gonna get out, and it's all going to be over.
Yes.
And then you see it's the friend. And
Yes.
it's that moment of relief, that moment where you kind of, the director knows where your mind is going, because
Yes.
the director is on the same wavelength as you, because the director is Black and is creating for Black people. It's that moment where we don't have to see the trauma go there, because we know it could go there.
Exactly.
And the director knows that we know that. And I feel like that moment of connection is like really what separates, you know, trauma from being malicious versus trauma from saying something important.
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. Yes.
Yeah. Because just to jump in, I remember watching interviews with Jordan Peele, and he goes into, there's actually 2 cuts of,
Mhm.
you know, Get Out, and thinking, like, sitting there, I'm so glad he made that choice to pull back, because there's a whole nother ending where, you know, there's actually 3, because there's one where, you know, the cops actually show up. There's one where he ends up in jail, and then there's one which is the theatrical cut. And it's amazing how it's so much more effective when you pull back just a little. What you always want to, like, in any filmmaking, any story making, is when it's in that in between, that really towing the line, that tightrope rope walking that we all have. That, oh, that's where all these feelings exist. It's very hard. But,
Yeah.
not everyone can be an artist, you know.